Hi everyone, it's Amy for Loud TV. Today I'm super happy we are with Alien Weaponry for a great interview. Hi, how are you first?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm all right. We actually have a very strong cyclone happening here. Tropical cyclone has just hit New Zealand. So if I disappear randomly, it's probably because our power's gone out.
Okay, let's hope it won't happen, okay?
Yeah, I know. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers super crossed. So we are here to talk mainly about your new album. I promised myself not trying to pronounce that, so Terra, something like this.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the album. What is it about? Everything about we need to know.
Yeah. So for this third album, one thing we really wanted to focus on was, for a fresh band, we're still relatively new and fresh on the scene, and we needed to sort of take a step back and evaluate where we were and what it was that we wanted to achieve with this third album. This third album we realized was very important for us, in terms of our career and where we're standing. First album was such a blast album onto the scene, and like everyone was like, "Oh, who's this? New band on the block." And then COVID hit, and the second album came out during COVID, and it kind of didn't land, and we didn't get too much growth out of that second album. And so were like sort of like, oh man, this third album, especially for a band all the way from New Zealand, it takes a lot for us to be able to do this. It's not like we can just get in our cars and drive to Hellfest. We have to fly halfway across the world to play these shows. So we were sort of like, oh man, this third album is really important for our career, I think. So it better be good. And so what we wanted to do then was go, okay, what do we want to show in this album? What about us do we want people to listen and hear through our music? And so it was we acknowledged the catchiness and the songwriting that came through the first album. And then what we really liked about the second album was it showed the technical improvements as musicians because we'd grown older, no longer teenagers, this kind of thing. And then we also wanted to be able to show people like, where are we at now? Like what's our influences now? It's not the same influences that they had 10 years ago or 5 years ago
Hmm.
during the second album, and try to find some sort of combination between all of those elements to create this third album. And so far the response has been amazing. A lot of people think like this is the album where we found our sound, so to speak. I actually think we're not quite there personally, but I think this album was a step closer to us cementing this sound that we're trying to still discover, considering we're so young and so fresh on the scene. But it's awesome to think that people think we're close, or there. So we know we're heading in the right direction anyway.
Hmm. Yeah, and also there is a new producer, Josh Wilbur, for this album. Uh, what did it change for you to work with this kind of producer?
Oh, that was a big part too of like the sound that we found was the expertise and knowledge and fresh set of ears too that someone like Josh could bring to the table. Very experienced producer, our first time working with him, and we didn't really know what to expect. It was also our first time recording an album outside of New Zealand, so
Hmm.
there was a lot of things sort of changing for us very quickly, and um thankfully, it ended up being wonderful working with Josh, and he brought so much to the table. He really focused in on the fact that Lewis, our singer, can sing. He was like, "Oh, dude, you're a great singer. You need to be singing more." And the inner metal elitist in the back of our mind was like, "Oh no, if you start singing, then people are gonna call you soft or blah blah blah." And Josh was like, "Who cares? Who cares? If you can sing, you should be singing." So Josh really helped us work on our vocal melodies and fine tune the catchiness. So like, there's so many hooks in this album, and a lot of those are thanks to Josh, because we weren't necessarily writing them that way before we went to Josh because of our concerns about how it might be perceived to have catchy songs. And then it was also just his ability to refine songs. So even in this album I had said to the band like the second album songs are too long or there's no structure to them, so going into this third album we need to like bring them down, refine them, give them more structure. So then maybe I was turning 5.5 minute songs down to 4 minute songs. Josh was taking them from 4 minute songs to 3.5 minute songs, so he was refining them even more. So yeah, it was awesome being able to work with someone like that who could see the vision, and then he just saw that, like, oh yeah, it just needs a couple finishing touches.
Yeah. Yeah, I see the point. You were talking about the structure of the songs, for instance, and these kind of things. What has been the creative process for this album?
Yeah, so this one was the biggest change on the creative process for this album was it was the first album where I was a full part of it because I joined Alien Weaponry
Yeah.
at the end of the second album's recording. So I didn't write any of the songs. I did record my vocals on that album and I did a guitar solo for one of the songs, but like my bass and all that sort of stuff's not on there. So this album was the first time that I was a part of the writing process from the beginning. And as you can see behind me, I am a guitar player, so like I play bass for the band, but I'm a guitar player at home. So, there's a lot of these riffs and songs that I've actually written entirely. And the way that I write was a little different to the way that the boys write. So that was like the first sort of switch up. They used to sit in a band room and kind of jam until they found stuff that they liked. But I found that was like inefficient, and didn't kind of work for the way that I like to write. So I suggested that if you fellas want to still jam and write together as brothers, you can go ahead and do that. But I'm going to sit here in my studio and write to my computer so that I can see everything and, fine tune everything like that. So that's what we did is we sort of split apart and I sat here and I wrote and wrote and wrote and they did their thing. And then we came together afterwards to like, find which ones are our favorite and then put lyrics over them and figure out the structures and how we wanted to go. But that's all before Josh.
Mm.
In that process as well, we reached out to Randy Blythe and got him to jump onto one of the tracks. And yeah, so that was kind of the major shift going into this album in terms of the creative process.
Mm. And you were talking about your two bandmates. How is this to be in a band with two brothers? Not saying that you're the plus one, of course. That's not what I mean. But however, that should be very special, I guess. So how is it to be part of a trio where there are two brothers?
Yeah, well, when you're working with families, anyone will know, families have their good days and they have their bad days, and,
Yes.
and siblings, of course, siblings allows a certain level of sibling rivalry to go on here and there. But of course, we're men now. It's not as bad as it was. I've known the boys for a long time. We went to school together,
Mm.
so it's not like they were strangers. And so I've seen them when they were teenagers and kids, like they're not like that anymore. We are adults now, so it's good fun. Once upon a time, the band used to be a real family affair. Their mum and dad used to be because they were touring so young that they couldn't go overseas without their parents or like play half these venues without parental supervision. So like when I joined the band, their parents were still working for the band. So now they don't. It's just us and the two brothers. But I've seen the whole family dynamic.
Yeah. And also, going back on the album stuff, of course, there are some songs that are in English, some song in Maori. How do you decide which song fits the perfect language? Is it about the theme, the values of the song, or is it the question of structure of the music? How do you decide that?
Yeah, so in terms of lyrical content, deciding the language is purely about the subject matter of the song. So we don't sing in Maori for things that don't affect or are about things Maori. So Lewis's mental health, for example, he likes to write a lot of songs about his like personal struggles. They're all in English. They're always in English.
Yeah.
But all the Maori stuff will be about Maori history, Maori mythology, things that affect Maori. So that's how we separate which is which. And Lewis writes all the English stuff. And then on this album, I wrote a lot of the Maori stuff. And then me and Henry wrote some of it. Um, in terms of how they go over certain songs, though, that is dictated by like it's just a feeling. Well, for the boys, it's a feeling. Like you can hear an instrumental and go Maori, or you can hear an instrumental and go, oh, it's English. There is somewhat though of a music theory rule, I suppose, or at least a guide. for those that know music theory. And like a lot of the songs that are in the Phrygian modes and a lot of the songs that have polyrhythms or interesting grooves to them tend to lean towards being in Maori. And then the more like traditional sounding metal songs, like the metalcore songs and those sorts of ones, tend to be in English, you know. So there is a rule, if you break it down, but like for the most part, we just know, you know, we can hear an instrumental and go Maori, English. It's like Tinder for languages.
Yeah, swipe.
Swipe left, swipe right.
Yeah. And can you imagine once having just a full Maori album?
I'm not sure, honestly, because to do that would exclude anything that Lewis has written.
Yes.
Because Lewis only writes in English.
Okay.
You know, it's not that he only writes the English, but he only writes in English. So he never writes in Maori, at the moment, at least. So if we said no Maori lyrics, that means he would never have his lyrical content or stories that he wants to tell represented on the album. So unless we were going specifically for some sort of like a concept album, which you know might lend itself to telling a story across the whole album completely in Maori. But in terms of our normal albums, I don't, not anytime soon anyway. It's not something we're planning on doing.
Mm. And just because it makes me very curious, is it the same process when you do a song in Maori than in English? Because you said we know it's this language or that one. However, is it the same process or does things change because you change the language of the songs?
Things change a little bit. Obviously, like the rhythmic nature of Maori is a little different to the way it is for English. So that's another way that we kind of know which songs are going to suit which language because the way that Maori is set up as a vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant language lends itself to this kind of syncopation that can be easy or difficult to fit over certain rhythms on the music. The other thing that's included in the Maori that is not included in English is we use on this album we used my uncle Ropata Taylor to be our like what do you call it? Cultural liaison sort of person. You know, like we used him to proofread and double check everything that we wrote because we don't speak it fluently. You know, we speak it a bit. We're still learning to speak it. So, and so we send a lot to him, or we send everything to him so that he could confirm that we were talking either just grammatically correct or also culturally correct, because anyone who speaks a different language will know, like, the way you don't just speak two languages, you have to speak the languages through the cultural view of the language that you're speaking. So sometimes it's like, sometimes we get a little too literal, for example, when we translate from English to Maori, and it's like, oh, I get what you're trying to say, but it actually needs to be translated like this, just to change it slightly so that it fits more from the Maori worldview versus the English to Maori thing.
Mm.
So that's another major change that is between the two languages where we don't need a proofreader for our
Proofreading.
English lyrics.
Yes, of course. That's interesting. You are talking about the culture, and for people, because of course, as foreigners, we all got our own idea of what is Maori culture, especially for maybe I'm going to say something which is stupid, maybe. Let's see. But for instance, as French people, I'm lucky enough to went to Tahiti, so we got an idea of Polynesia, Maori culture, all these kind of things. But if you should describe us very briefly the core values of the Maori culture, what would you say? How would you explain that to us?
Yeah, so it's three words that I would use that would probably be generally considered the like three cultural core values of Maoridom, and that is whanaungatanga, kaitiakitanga, and manakitanga. So whanaungatanga is kinship, family, community. And then kaitiakitanga is guardianship. So to look after the environment, look after the people around you, and manakitanga is hospitality. So those are generally considered the like three major core values of Maori people, and it's probably not too dissimilar to other Polynesian groups, you know, throughout the Pacific Island. You know, we're very community based.
Yeah.
cultures throughout the Pacific, and family is a lot to us, and that's why we mark our skin to represent our families and our communities, and and the way that we acknowledge the environment and try to look after the and understand our relationship with the environment too has always been a significant part of these cultures.
Mm. I see. I see just after you something with Gojira. So, with those three values, they could have been Maori because they have those three big values so much.
They do, and I think that's a reason we worked so well on that tour is even though like musically we're like a little different, although these days our the band is quite influenced by Gojira because we spent so much time on the road with them, but like our music before we did the Gojira tours, where am I? That side, um, was a little different, but it was our values that I think were shared quite strongly across the two bands. So when we went on that tour, it worked quite well because a lot of people like they understood, both bands and what we stood for.
Mm. Talking about touring, last few years you've been touring a lot, and you are a band that is very, very great on shows. I saw you only twice at Hellfest, and every time you can see the crowd very, this is inclusive for the crowd and immersive for people, even people who don't know you. How does that live experience and touring experience influence this new album? Is this something that you had in mind? Did you craft some songs for next lives, for instance, or?
Yeah, so for this album specifically, actually, that was a whole focus of the writing process because what we had something we had noticed, we acknowledge like our live show is something that a lot of people really like about our band. We've even had people make backhanded compliments where they go, I don't listen to their music at home, but I do like to go watch them perform live. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like, even in the circumstance where people don't even like our music, they like our live show. And so we sort of pride ourselves on our live performance and we acknowledge then the importance of our live performances. Also, that's how you win a majority of your audiences these days, is out on shows at festivals, opening for bigger bands. So one thing we had noticed about the second album, particularly, was there were songs that we liked. And then we were like, yeah, let's put those on our set list. And then we would play them live and they didn't kind of land, they didn't hit the same as some of the songs off the first album. And so for us, acknowledging that we are such a live band going into this third album, we were like, think about how the songs that we're writing will be received live. And the good news is, not that the rest of the world has seen it yet, but we played a New Zealand tour
Mm.
right before the album came out too. So no one had heard the songs yet. And we were playing these new songs for our New Zealand audience for the first time. And the response was crazy. Like songs they'd never heard. They were going crazy in the pit. They were, jumping around and doing all sorts of fun stuff. So it was awesome to see before people even had got their hands on the songs that they were responding well to it live, which was our goal and our intention. And it was sort of put to practice there. And so now we're really looking forward to getting out and touring with those songs now that people can listen to them and become familiar with them so they know what to expect. So yeah, anyway, it was a specific focus on this album, so I'm glad you mentioned it.
Mm. Yeah. And talking about life, there is one question I like to ask. Do you have a fun anecdote from touring that you never mentioned to anybody, something very fun or a very cool anecdote that you'd like to share with us?
I don't know, we're actually a little boring
Oh,
when we go on the road, like we because these days it's a job,
of
and
course.
it's like, we gone are the days of constant partying and the whole sex, drugs, rock and roll lifestyle. It's like we get there, we wake up, we play the show, we go to bed, watch some movies on the bus and then go to sleep and call it a day. So like nothing crazy is ever really happening. A lot of the time it's just the opportunities to meet cool people, and learn from um when we're playing with Gojira, or we just did a tour with Kerry King at the start of this year, like um these are musicians that we're striving to reach, that level at some point in our career. In the next 10, 20 years, we would like to be where they are, when they're their age. So it's awesome opportunities for us to learn so much from these experts, like, we're still trying to learn and find our way. And as some of these, someone like Kerry King, he's been touring longer than we've been alive, so he has a lot of knowledge that we can learn from. So it's awesome to be able to share the road and get all these opportunities, especially again, from being on this side of the world. It's like you'd never dream. It's so hard for bands in this country to get outside of New Zealand. We feel very privileged to be able to do so.
Mm. And of course, honestly, on live once again, this is so great to see you and the album. The album is very, very cool. I reviewed that. But how do you explain that it worked for you? Of course, there is the quality of the music, but you are from an Iceland, very not excluded from the rest of the world, of course. But however, it's not easy to travel the world. And when the band started when you were so young, so how do you explain it worked so well for you?
I think this is just me observing the boys,
Yeah.
of course, before I joined it, and seeing how they functioned before they invited me to be a part of it. And there's a few things at play. Obviously, there's persistence. They were not an overnight success. They started when we were in school together. They were leaving school like to go play shows to like three people. They would drive hours away, play two, three songs over and over to like nobody. You know what I mean? Like getting the hours in, getting the work in early. This is when they were like, 13, 14. And then, our school that we went to, they gave them a sort of, you either have to pick this band or you're going to have to pick schooling because you're not going to pass school. And they're like, well, we're going to pick the band. So there's persistence, this absolute drive to keep going, and trying and trying and trying until one day it works. And then there's the other element that is a real element, and not a lot of people want to hear this element, is timing and luck. That's the other important thing. You can work as hard as you want, but if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And so for these boys, it was that the first overseas festival that they played. I'm not even sure where that was. Metal Days, I think,
Mm.
in Slovenia. Don't quote me on that though. But they played this festival overseas. And they'd only had one, but they were like, yeah, let's do it. This is an opportunity for us to play overseas. Why not? It might never happen again. And then before you know it, they spent 8 months on the road because someone saw them there and went, oh, yeah, we need this band to play here. And then they had to play here and play here and play here, play. And it just kind of just grew, So it was the right place at the right time. But that wouldn't have happened without the drive and that persistence to even get to a point where someone's going to go, oh, why don't we try out this band all the way from New Zealand? Also, the genre helps. Like heavy metal helps. Well, I don't know how to explain this, but like New Zealand music has a very uniquely New Zealand sound that is very popular in New Zealand, but doesn't necessarily expand.
Yeah.
It can get to Australia, or maybe like Hawaii and places like that. But it's like a very unique regional sound. Whereas heavy metal, of course, is global. And yes, we sing in Maori, but like the music that we're playing is global music, and it's loved all over the world. So I think that's another big factor, because I think we're there's only one other band that comes to mind for me, called Shapeshifter, Fat Freddy's Drop, sorry, from New Zealand, that they're like a electronic music dub reggae sort of band, that play a lot of shows in Europe at the big European festivals. But other than them, like it's us that comes to mind as bands from New Zealand that spend a lot of time overseas, or more time overseas than we spend at home, I should say.
Mm.
In terms of like not global superstars like Lord, is that's like a different category of musician.
Sure. No, no, but you're totally right. Thank you so much for this great interview and for your time. And we hope to see you live, maybe for a European tour or something like this.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, thank you for having me. There's
Yeah,
some stuff in the works for sure that we have had confirmed to us, and so now we're just waiting for the announcement day
announcement.
whenever that comes out. So we're very excited. For me personally, what's coming up is a dream tour. So
Ooh,
that might be a hint for some people out there if they know me well enough.
Okay, thank you so much. See you
Thank
on the
you.
road soon.